The streets had seen his face 1,000 times, dust-covered, hunched over walking stick, layers of old clothes clinging to him like the past. No one knew that behind the matted beard and limp was Santiago V. Graves, the silent tycoon behind some of the world's largest companies. He had lived in penthouses that scraped the clouds. But in the last years of his life, Santiago chose the alleys. He had built an empire worth billions, but had no children, no wife, and no family he trusted. He had seen too many greedy eyes, too many smiles with price tags. And so, one cold November morning, he vanished from the Forbes list and the tabloids. To the world, he had died quietly in his estate. But Santiago was very much alive, just hidden beneath the disguise of poverty. He wandered the city for almost a year. He begged for change he didn't need. He watched people's reactions. Most passed him with hurried steps. Some threw coins without looking. A few insulted him. And then, he met her. Mira. She worked the morning shift at a corner café. Every day as she set up, she saw him in the same spot across the street. Unlike others, she didn't look away. She brought him coffee when she could. Some days, a leftover sandwich. Some days, nothing but a smile and a good morning. She never asked his name. She never asked his story. She didn't know she was feeding a billionaire. One evening, rain poured like the city was trying to cleanse itself. Mira walked out of the cafe and found him shivering, soaked to the bone. She rushed back in, grabbed the emergency poncho under the counter, and ran to him. She helped him stand and took him under the cafe's small awning. "I can't let you freeze to death," she said, holding his hand in hers to warm it. He looked at her for a long time. Her kindness was like a whisper in a world full of noise. He smiled genuinely for the first time in years. Weeks passed. Then, one day, he disappeared. Mira waited for him. Checked every alley nearby. Asked around. Nothing. She never expected anything from him. But she missed him. 3 months later, she was at work when a man in a black suit came in with an envelope. "Are you Mira Solangi?" he asked. She nodded. He handed her the envelope and left without another word. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mira, you showed kindness without knowing who I was. You gave without expectation, and that is rarer than gold. I am Santiago V. Graves. If you're reading this, it means I have passed. Enclosed is the final part of my will, my empire, my properties, my legacy, they're yours. Not because I pity you, but because I trust you'll know what to do with it. The world needs more people like you. Don't change. With gratitude. Santiago." Also enclosed, keys to a mansion, documents of ownership, and a bank account number that nearly made her faint. Mira sat in the cafe for a long time, tears quietly falling. Not from shock, but from knowing that kindness, real kindness, had echoed louder than greed ever could. She didn't quit the cafe immediately. She bought it instead. She raised wages. Started a foundation in Santiago's name. Opened shelters. Built homes. Offered jobs to those who, like him, had been invisible. She became the woman with the billions, but she remained the girl with the morning smile. And every year, on the date he disappeared, she sat on that same street corner and gave out warm coffee to every stranger who passed by. Just in case another Santiago was watching. Because kindness without expectation is the greatest wealth. Months passed, and the world slowly learned Mira's story. But she never did interviews. She never posed for magazine covers. She simply said, "It wasn't my money, it was a message. I'm just delivering it." She quietly transformed an entire neighborhood once plagued by hunger and homelessness. She opened the House of Graves, a shelter that offered not just a bed, but mentorship and opportunity. She didn't want to give people coins, she wanted to give them a path. One day, a teenage boy named Emil stood at the shelter gate. Dirt on his jeans, eyes full of anger, and a backpack slung across one shoulder. Mira watched him from the office window, sensing something familiar, the same hardened edge she had seen in Santiago when he first sat across her cafe. She stepped outside. "You looking for a place to sleep?" "I don't need anyone's pity," Emil shot back. "Good," Mira smiled. "We don't offer pity here. Only purpose." He narrowed his eyes. She pointed to a board listing jobs. Garden assistant. Kitchen prep. Library sort. You work, you eat, you stay. No one owes anyone anything. Fair. He stared at her for a long moment, then muttered, fair. That night, Emil washed dishes. The next week, he painted walls. The next month, he was teaching kids math. And in 6 months, he called the shelter home. Mira had no children, but the world kept sending her sons and daughters like him, people lost in systems, ignored by policies, failed by families. She gave them what Santiago had given her, belief. Years turned quietly like pages in a book. Mira never became flashy. Her home, Santiago's old mansion, was turned into a learning center. She lived in a modest apartment above the café, the same one where she used to clean tables. One night, as she was closing the café, she saw a man shivering near the bus stop. Reflexively, she grabbed a cup of soup and walked over. Hey, are you okay? She asked. He looked up, eyes wide. Are you, the Mira? She smiled gently. I'm a Mira. He chuckled through chattering teeth. She handed him the soup. And for a moment, she wondered, was this another test? Another wandering soul searching for humanity? But the thought passed. It didn't matter who he was. Because the lesson had become her heartbeat. Kindness without expectation is the greatest wealth. And somewhere, maybe watching from beyond the clouds, Santiago V. Graves smiled again. Because his final will had been more than just paper. It had become a legacy alive in every act of unprovoked goodness, every soul Mira touched, and every life forever changed by the quiet power of compassion. Years melted gently into each other, like soft candle wax dripping into a single flame that refused to die. Mira aged, but never grew old in spirit. Her steps remained light, her eyes steady with the kind of calm only people who have walked through both shadow and sunshine can wear. The cafe she once worked in became a city landmark. Not for its coffee, though that remained excellent, but because people called it the place where kindness began. Visitors from around the world came hoping to meet her. Some brought gifts, some brought tears, and some brought their broken stories, hoping to find healing in her presence. But Mira had one rule. Don't come to thank me, go out and thank the next person. That's the real tribute. The House of Graves expanded to 5 cities. Each one followed the same principle. No judgment, no savior complex, no empty handouts. Everyone contributed something: time, talent, even a smile. One morning, Mira received a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of a young woman standing in front of the new shelter in Disquises, holding a newborn in her arms. On the back, in neat handwriting, it read, "My son will never sleep on a bench the way I did. Thank you for breaking the cycle. Irene." Mira held the photo close to her chest. For a moment, her eyes brimmed with the kind of quiet emotion she rarely allowed to spill. The walls of her office were now covered with similar notes, letters from people she'd never met, lives touched by programs she didn't personally run, hearts healed by the ripple of Santiago's one final act. She never sought recognition. But these letters, they were the true currency she cherished. One winter evening, the wind howled louder than usual, and Mira sat by the window of her small apartment above the cafe, sipping tea, the same table where Santiago once left a napkin with just the words, "The real wealth is invisible." She smiled, rereading it for the 1,000th time. She didn't know how long she had left, no one ever really does. But she was ready. When the morning sun finally arrived, warming the frost on the cafe windows, Mira didn't come down to open the doors. They found her sitting in her chair, hands folded, eyes closed, a soft smile etched on her face, peaceful, like someone who had finished writing the final line of a beautiful story. There was no media frenzy, no cameras, just a handwritten note beside her, addressed to whoever comes after. You don't need to change the world all at once. Just change the world of one person without expecting anything back. That's enough. Let kindness be your final will. And let it live beyond you. Mira. She was buried in a quiet ceremony beneath a tree she once planted behind the shelter. And for years to come, on the anniversary of her passing, people from all walks of life would leave small cups of coffee and folded napkins with kind messages under that tree. No statue was built. No foundation bore her name. And yet, everywhere from the laughter in shelters to the hope in job centers, to a child's warm bed in a safe home, Mira lived on. Because in a world obsessed with riches, she had shown what true wealth really was. Earnest, quiet, unshakable, without expectation. A billionaire's final will had never been money. It had always been her. And the story didn't end with Mira's passing. It only multiplied. The café stayed open, managed now by Emil, the once angry teenager she had welcomed without question. He kept everything as it was. Same wooden chairs, same bell above the door, same photo of Mira behind the counter smiling in her apron. But one thing he added was a small jar by the register with a handwritten label. Pay it forward in memory of Mira. People dropped in coins, bills, notes. One day a man walked in, clearly shaken, and whispered, "Can I sit down for a minute?" Emil simply nodded, handed him tea on the house. The man returned a week later, dressed neatly, smiling. He slipped a check into the jar. "Because you let me feel human again." The ripples Mira created were now waves. Her idea, kindness without expectation, had become a quiet revolution. Schools taught about her philosophy. Business owners adopted it into their ethics. Shelters across the region hung signs above their doors. "No one walks in here unseen." And far away, on a cold night in New York, a young billionaire named Layla Kincaid sat at a gala. The guests wore diamonds, the food came plated like artwork, and speeches echoed with rehearsed gratitude. Layla listened, but she felt empty, like something essential was missing. She left early, walking the rainy streets alone, and stumbled into a bookstore just before it closed. A single book sat on the display table, humble and thin. The title read, "The Final Will: How Kindness Built an Empire." She flipped through pages filled with Mira's life, and Santiago's, and stories of countless others changed not by money, but by simple acts of compassion. That night Layla couldn't sleep. The next morning, she dissolved 3 companies that profited from predatory loans. She launched a foundation called Invisible Hands, dedicated to supporting anonymous acts of kindness around the globe. She credited the book. But more than that, she credited the lesson. True wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give away freely, when no one's watching. 1 year later, in a quiet African village, an old man sat beneath a tree, Mira's tree. He was sick, tired, but not bitter. He had been on the streets of Europe for decades before someone handed him a hot cup of tea and whispered, "Mira says hello." He had walked away that day not knowing who Mira was. But now he sat here, under the very tree that held her spirit, finally understanding. Children gathered around him as he told them stories. Not of war or suffering, but of strangers who had helped him without knowing his name. And he smiled. Because legacies are not measured in buildings or banks. They are measured in the soft moments when someone chooses to be kind when no one's watching, and no one's keeping score. And in that moment, beneath the rustling leaves, with the children laughing around him and the wind carrying memories through the branches, the old man whispered to the sky, "Thank you, Mira. Thank you, Santiago. You made the world remember what wealth really means." And just like that, the story went on. Not in pages, not in monuments, but in hearts. One kind act at a time. Forever. The seasons turned as they always do. But something had shifted across the world. Quietly. Deeply. A movement had taken root not in headlines or hashtags but in habits. In morning routines. In how strangers greeted each other. In how communities held each other. People no longer waited for wealth to act generously. They understood. Kindness didn't need permission. The cafe that Mira once worked in became a training space for young people who wanted to start compassion businesses, small ventures where people came first. One boy, barely 17, opened a bike repair shop where the first fix was always free. A young woman started a daycare where every child got a handwritten note every Friday, just like Mira used to leave for her shelter staff. All across the globe, people who had never met Santiago or Mira began quoting their words. Not in lectures but in life. Kindness without expectation, they'd say when handing a sandwich to a stranger. Is the greatest wealth, someone else would reply, often with tears. One day, deep in the mountains of Rwanda, a group of students were building a footpath to help older villagers reach the local clinic. They had never heard of Santiago graves. But their teacher, a woman named Esther, stood by the path with a cane and a wrinkled old book under her arm. The final will. It had become her compass. She had once been a single mother struggling to find food until a program from the House of Graves helped her turn her cooking into a business. When she got on her feet, she didn't forget. She printed hundreds of copies of the book and handed them to every student who graduated from her school. You won't all be rich, she told them, but you can all be legendary. One of her students, a boy named Alan, wrote on the wall of their small schoolhouse, "You don't need to be known to be remembered. Just be kind, and the world will remember for you." In the years that followed, Alan became a teacher, then a mayor, then a national leader who made sure every policy he passed started with one question. Does this help someone who has nothing to give in return? And so, Santiago's empire, which had once been made of stock, buildings, and offshore accounts, now existed in words painted on clinic walls, in soup kitchens named after strangers, and in every hand held out with no strings attached. Mira's memory was not carved in marble but in morning routines, parents tying their child's shoes and reminding them, be kind, even if no one sees. 100 years later, a little girl would walk by a mural of a smiling woman serving coffee to a man with a walking stick. She'd ask, "Mama, who is that?" And her mother would kneel down and whisper, "That's Mira. She didn't save the world. She reminded us that we could." And across the generations, in every act of quiet generosity, the story would go on. No chapters. No endings. Just kindness. Just love. Forever. And so, the story rippled. Through the hush of hearts opening. Through dusty villages and glittering cities. Through strangers choosing kindness when no one asked them to. Decades passed. The world became faster, louder, more digital. Yet Mira's message never faded. Instead, it adapted. Her words lived in unexpected places, a pop-up on a donation app. Give without expecting. Mira did. In subway art that simply read, kindness builds empires the eye cannot see. And in a digital game, where one hidden level was unlocked only when the player chose to help a struggling character without being told to. That level was called the final will. But more powerful than all that was the way people lived. A girl in Brazil baked an extra loaf of bread every morning for someone who passed her window on their way to work. A grandfather in Seoul saved his pension to help orphan children go to school because Santiago would have, he said. And in the heart of what used to be Santiago Grave's sprawling estate, now a peaceful public garden, a plaque stood beneath a tree. Not a grand one, just a simple wooden sign. In memory of two invisible giants. Santiago, who had everything and gave it away. Mira, who had nothing and gave even more. Their will was not written in gold, but in good. Please, continue it. Children played nearby. Elderly couples sat on benches and fed birds. Volunteers tended the flowers. Tourists often asked, "Why is this place so quiet, so gentle?" The guides always smiled and replied, "Because this garden was planted with kindness." And still, somewhere in the world each day, a hand reaches out to lift another. A meal is left for a hungry stranger. A letter arrives when someone needs hope. A life is changed, not by money, but by mercy. And no one claims the credit. No one takes a photo. Because the story teaches them. True wealth is anonymous. True legacy is unseen. And the final will is never truly final. It lives on. In you. Right now. Every time you choose to give, even when the world tells you to take. So go on. Write the next line. Not with ink, but with action. The story waits for your kindness. And somewhere far from the gardens, Far from the plaques and books and murals, a boy sat on a quiet bench beside his mother. He was young, restless, asking questions in that curious way children do. "Mama, what's a will? Is it like a spell?" She smiled. "No, my love. A will is something someone leaves behind to guide the world after they're gone." He thought for a moment, then asked, "Like Mira's will?" She nodded. "But she didn't leave money, right? She left something better." "What?" The mother turned, touched his chest softly. "She left this. A reason to care. A way to see people." The boy fell silent. He didn't fully understand. Not yet. But that night, he folded a piece of paper carefully and slipped it under his little sister's pillow. On it, in uneven, clumsy handwriting, were just 5 words. "You are never alone. Love, Big Brother." The next morning, she found it and beamed. She didn't tell anyone. She just wrote her own note. Left it in a neighbor's mailbox. And the chain continued. No names. No praise. Just simple acts. A librarian waived late fees for a struggling student. A shop owner repaired an old man's radio for free. A teen paid for a stranger's lunch, anonymously. The world still had problems, wars, greed, heartbreak, but there was something else now. A thread. A whisper. A steady flame passed hand to hand like a sacred torch. And in the quiet spaces between chaos, you could sometimes hear it. Kindness is the empire. In a distant part of the world, a child with no internet, no books, and no formal school sat under a mango tree. A traveling volunteer had once told him the story of Mira. Just once. But he remembered every word. And with a stick in the dirt, he began drawing people helping one another, stick figures smiling, reaching out, sharing. He didn't know it, but that story had now reached corners no camera could capture. It had become eternal. Because when one soul touches another through love alone, without demand, without reward, that is forever. And so, the final will never ends. It is renewed with every quiet hand held, every wrong forgiven, every sacrifice made in silence. It lives in hearts, passed like breath, until one day the whole world understands. We are not here to gather wealth. We are here to give it away. Not just the coins in our pocket, but the gentleness in our voice, the patience in our actions, the mercy in our judgment. And when each of us is gone, the greatest will we can leave behind is the love someone else gives. Because of us. That is the true inheritance. That is the story's final truth. And that, dear reader, is now yours to carry forward.